Ladies and gentlemen, we have two very distinguished guests today. One of them you have already met during the keynote address day before yesterday. Nayantara Sahgal has been, I won't say a prolific writer, but she has written a lot, not only about politics of India, but she also has written a lot of novels about very strong women with a very feminist perspective. In 1984, she was awarded the Sahitya Academy Award for her English novel, Rich Like Us, the award that she has recently returned to the government of India to show her protest about the current political situation and the ideology that is permeating in the Indian landscape. We have with us also Ritu Menon, who wrote this book called Out of Line, the literary and political biography of Nayantara Sahgal. She will also talk about her perspectives about the current publications that she has done. She also has a very feminist and what I have heard, a bit of a left-leaning perspective. Yes, I hope so, in certain cases. So I was asking at the backstage, Ms. Sahgal, that why did it take for her to come to Bangladesh this long, and she just very honestly answered, nobody invited me. So I'm glad that we have invited her this time. So welcome to her to Dhaka, Bangladesh, to the Dhaka Lit Fair. Can we just talk about the recent returning of your award and the circumstances that made you do that?
Well, is it coming over? Can you hear me? Recently, as you must have read in your press, 3 Indian writers, very distinguished writers and rationalists, were murdered for their beliefs and for writing as they were doing. And the murders took place in a curious way. Gun-toting motorcyclists drove past, rang the doorbell, the man came out and he was shot in the head. And these men have not been apprehended, they have not been brought to justice. So I felt that the Sahitya Academy, which is our highest academy of literature, the guardian of literature, should have raised its voice against these murders. One of these men murdered was a Sahitya Academy awardee. So I felt that that should have been done, but the Academy did not raise its voice. And so I, along with other writers, felt that we should, as a gesture of protest, return our awards to the Academy, and 40 writers have indeed returned their awards. Then, thank you for your support. It's very, very welcome and very needed. After that, soon afterwards, a Muslim blacksmith was dragged out of his house and lynched on the suspicion that he was cooking beef or keeping beef in his house. That made our protest grow much wider. It became a countrywide issue in a country where our constitution guarantees every Indian to live and eat and worship as he chooses. And even had the man had beef in his kitchen, which he didn't have, nobody had a right to kill him. So it became then a countrywide protest about the meaning of India and the fact that we must now assert our voices and make it known that we will not let the meaning of India as a plural, diverse country be destroyed. And that protest has extended to historians, scientists, sociologists, academics, artists, and across the world. Writers from 150 different countries have supported us. 200 British writers marched a few days ago in Britain in support of us. So for us, it is now a very crucial issue, not just a question of being free to write or free to speak, but the idea of India as a plural society, which has for centuries been multi-religious, multicultural, and which has chosen at independence to be a secular democratic republic. Now today, it is that idea that is under attack, and we will not allow those attackers to succeed.
We are having a similar kind of events, incidents where here lots of free thinkers are getting assassinated and murdered, and we have not been able to catch the perpetrators yet. So there seems to be a trend that is happening in the South Asian region in the same way. Yesterday, Jon Snow was here talking about when he became a reporter. He thought the Berlin Wall would have been forever. And then they predicted that the country will get united, the East and West Germany, 10, 15 years. It happened within 2 weeks. The history doesn't seem to follow a pattern that we expect or the way we wish it to happen. Indian history goes back thousands of years. Secularism has been instituted in the 1940s when it became independent. Do you think it is under threat in a serious way, where that to the point that that secular characteristics will be irrevocably reversed, or do you think it is just a blip in history where it will go back to its more secular, more open-minded frame of mind in the long term?
What was the last part again?
Whether do you think this kind of extremism that is happening in India, this is just a blip in history, in the longer history of India, or do you think it will go back to its openness soon?
We can't underestimate the kind of transition that is taking place. It is extremely serious because it aims at our very foundations. Since independence, of course, all governments make mistakes. All governments have sinned, you might say, in one way or another. But there's never been a government which has tried to destroy the meaning of India. So this is a first in independent India's history. And we have to take this moment very, very seriously if we are going to turn the tide. And to turn the tide is what we are doing now. Not just writers, but as I said, groups of people, individuals from different disciplines. And the most remarkable thing about this effort to turn the tide is that it is coming from individuals and from different disciplines. It's not as though we have ever met in one room to sit together and decide, now we must do this, now we must do this. It's not a movement. It's not organized. It's because in those who believe in India as a plural society are so profoundly disturbed that they are giving these highly individual responses, and all these have brought us together. And I have to say that even the President of India has had to speak out against the tide. So it can be turned back. Why not? Enough people have to want it and work for it. And I think that is what we are all, in our different ways, engaged in doing, including the vegetable sellers in my bazaar, where I live in Dehradun. People like that, whom we call the Aam Aadmi, the common man, is profoundly disturbed at what is going on. And not only the minorities, it is Hindus who are disturbed. I'm a Hindu myself, and millions of Hindus like me are disturbed at this idea of turning India into a Hindu state. So we have to certainly work at it. There's no guarantee in history about these things unless people work for them.
The effort has to be always there to make sure that that progression is taking place. Let me talk about your family. The audience probably already knows that she's the granddaughter of Motilal Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru.
I'm his
niece, sorry. Jawaharlal Nehru was your uncle. And at the same time, like when Mr. Subhan was yesterday talking about his part and his observations about the history of Bangladesh to its inception and independence. You also have a very, I would say, an inner insight about the independence of India. Your father was in jail. Your mother was an distinguished diplomat who served the country. There was also a little bit of story I heard that you were about to be appointed the ambassador to Italy, I believe, and it was canceled at the last moment after Mrs. Gandhi came back to power. So you saw a lot of this tumultuous history of India that you had, in one of the writings I read, that you had complained that the Indians had gone away from the principles of Jawaharlal Nehru in terms of its what it is now. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I think that's what I have been saying, that at this moment it looks as though our present government is trying to destroy Nehru's legacy, which is not only Nehru's legacy. This is the legacy that was given birth to by the entire national movement for independence, which was led by Mahatma Gandhi. And it was into that independence movement that whole communities, entire regions, different languages, men, women, class, mass, all came together to form a movement to struggle for freedom. So that is the legacy which we declared at India to be the Nehruvian legacy, because he was then the prime minister who carried it forward. And yes, that is in process of being deliberately destroyed. And as I said, that is what we are working to preserve.
My next question is about, again, about Indira Gandhi. You had written a few books that had criticized her emergency rule, but in Bangladesh, she is remembered as playing a very pivotal role in the independence of Bangladesh. Her very proactive role in the freedom movement sort of shortened the war, and especially in the month of December, her military actions that sort of accelerated the surrender of the Pakistani army here. Even in the book, Rich Like Us, you had brought that emergency into your novels. And even in other books, there's quite a bit of political kind of commentary that you bring into your stories. My question is, when you were critical of the Nehru regime, over here, I mean, without sounding too political, I mean, the backlashes are very much right away. How were you treated when you published those books officially? Or the administration at the time?
No, I don't think Indira Gandhi ever read my books. I don't know. I mean, how can I be sure?
Because there was some quips that her son had told somebody that you should be put in jail for writing what you'd written.
I think what she had read was not my fiction, but probably the political commentary which I had been writing for some years before the emergency, which had been opposing her politically, some of the policies which she was following at the time, nothing to do with anything personal. But she didn't want criticism, and she didn't want it especially from her own family. So I think I fell into disfavor at that time. And yes, I could have been put in jail during the emergency.
Was that relationship ever reconciled?
Well, you know, when, as you know, India was very much involved in the struggle for freedom for Bangladesh. And we remain very emotionally attached to you on that level. And after the Bangladesh victory was declared, I went with my mother to see Indira and to congratulate her. And it was a formal kind of meeting, not as it might have been otherwise. But we went to congratulate her at that time.
I have a question to Ritu Menon now, because you had taken this project of writing about the life of Ms. Sahgal, in spite of the fact that she has already written a bit of her biography herself. What insight did you think you could have, when you started the project, not after published the book, but when you approached her, what different aspect did you think you would find out about her, and what did you want to highlight about it?
You know, there are 2 or 3 things that are very remarkable about the fact that, or rather very unusual about the fact that I wanted to write her biography. I actually asked her to write it herself. And she said no. Why would anyone be interested, she said. So I said, well, I think there's a great deal that would interest people. Mindful of the fact that she had already written 2 volumes of what are called her autobiographies, but she wrote them when she was 27 and 32 or 33 years old. So obviously it was not an account of her full life. But actually that's not what interested me. What interested me was that the fact that she is the only writer in my, as far as I know, writing either in English or in any of the other languages in India, of which there are 25 or 28, as you know. She is the only writer who has consistently written the political. Consistently. Fiction, non-fiction, political writing, essays, autobiography. There is not a single piece of her writing which is not infused with the political. Now, that struck me as something extraordinary. And so what I wanted to do, and what I hope I've been able to do, although I can't say, is to, through her writing, follow the evolution of the country post-independence. There's not a single novel of hers which does not touch upon a critical event in post-independence India, either social or political. There's not a single novel that does not inextricably intertwine the personal with the political, not one. There's not a single line of her political writing which is not inflected and informed by her own politics. I'm a feminist. How am I to write a biography that is both personal and political, but also literary? What is the means by which I can do this to arrive at an insight about how a woman writes her country? That's what's important for me. That's what I thought she might do, which she said may not interest anyone. I thought it would interest quite a lot of people. The fact that she comes from such a high-profile political family made it very difficult, because it's not that she's written everything about her own life, so what can I add to it? It's that this whole damn family has written everything about its life. I mean, her uncle Nehru said, I think I've started, I've infected everybody with writing autobiographies. Her mother wrote her autobiographies, she wrote her autobiographies, the uncle wrote his, and I dare say if Indira Gandhi had wanted to write, she would write her autobiography, would have. So what am I to do with this subject, whose, if you read her, you've read her life. If you read her, you've read her politics. If you read her, you've read a certain politics of India, or at least a certain historical evolution of the country, post-independence. So I thought, well, since I'm a feminist and I'm foolish enough to step in where everyone else fears to go, I will see if I can not to have looked at whatever was possible. At the same time, obviously the Nehrus and Mrs. Gandhi can't dominate her story. So it was a bit of a challenge to keep her in the foreground, but never to forget that she is in the foreground, but she has a background. And her background is what made the story so, for me, as a subject, so fascinating.
Ms. Sahgal, do you think the book had covered every aspect of your life?
I haven't read it.
Okay. Okay, are you going to read it soon, I hope?
No, I'm not planning to read it, no.
Okay, all right. I was actually flipping through some of the pictures that are published in that book, and you also have met a lot of interesting people, including, very briefly, met Frida Kahlo, for example. You were telling me backstage that you had met her for 2 days. Frida Kahlo became a huge star posthumously in the 80s and onward. In those days, she was just beginning to blossom. What do you recall of her in those days?
I have very vivid recollections of her. She gave me 2 beautiful pictures of herself, portraits, signed to me, which are very precious to me, and I have them in my home, yeah. But when I met her, she was known as Frida Rivera. You know, she was the wife of Diego Rivera, and later she became a cult figure and known in her own name. My younger sister and I, we were both studying in America at the time, had gone to see her through the introduction of the host with whom we were staying, Miguel Covarrubias, who was a famous archaeologist and artist. And we went there to her house, and we met as if we'd always known each other. It was extraordinary. She was very, very thin. She had been through dreadful physical suffering. She had had accidents, as I think are well known now. And she was wearing full skirts, the peasant skirts. So I said to her, we spent a couple of days with her, so we got talking about a lot of things. And I said to her, Frida, why are you wearing these peasant skirts? So she said, darling, without this, I look like Mahatma Gandhi. So then my sister Rita and I had brought a sari, so we put her in a sari. And she looked lovely, and she was delighted with that. And then she showed us her rooms were full of portraits, which were all self-portraits. All her own pictures, portraits of herself. And they were remarkable. And in one of them, she shows her womb with Diego in it. I said, but he's your husband, you know. How come you put him in the womb? She said, he is also my child, you know. He's everything, you know. So she was an amazing, amazing woman. And later, many years later, when I saw the film made of her, I couldn't bear to watch it beyond half of it, because the actress, I think it was Salma Hayek, looked so much like Frida, you know, and I couldn't bear to see her go through all the suffering that I knew she had gone through at that time.
Did you meet any of the political people who were very much part of that household at the time?
There was nobody in the house except Frida, you know, at that time. So Diego, yes, I met Diego separately. He was, what is the famous museum in Mexico? Not Prado, what is it? The famous National Museum or Gallery, where Diego had been asked
to do the murals there.
To do a mural.
Murals, yeah.
And he was on a high, stair, painting high up on the wall or on the ceiling, I forget. And I thought he was the ugliest man I had ever seen. He was fat, and to me, well, I was 18 years old, so he looked very old. He may have been 50, I don't know. And then when he was told, would you please come down and meet Nehru's nieces? My sister and I were standing there in our saris. And he was enchanted, you know. Nehru was a world-famous name, much admired across the world, certainly in Mexico. And Diego came down very slowly from the staircase and kissed our hands. And I'd never been so thrilled in my life.
Even though he was the ugliest man you'd ever...
Even if he was the ugliest man.
When your mother was the ambassador in so many other countries, I'm sure you had traveled in quite a few places. What are the other personalities outside the Indian politics that you have met? There's a picture of, for example, the comedian Bob Hope, of all people. And there's also a picture of you in a photo shoot for Vogue magazine. Vogue magazine.
Photo feature with Vogue, on Vogue, the Vogue cover. Oh yeah, Vogue.
Can you just share a few moments of being a model for a day?
I have to just add that in the Wellesley, because she was at Wellesley, in the Wellesley yearbook, she was mentioned, captioned as the most beautiful woman on the campus.
Wow.
It's true.
Well,
Anyway, Vogue.
it's Vogue. Oh, these things matter.
No, Vogue, you see, in those days, India was an exotic place. And through all my writing, I have objected to this exotica business, which was demanded by the Orientalism of the time. I and my older sister were asked to pose for Vogue, which we did, well, because of our saris. What else, you know? Sari is a very romantic dress, very beautiful, and very, you know, for Americans, something different. I mean, there is a country which is so homogeneous. They look alike, they talk alike, they dress alike, and they all eat hamburgers, you know? So here was something so outside the pale, as it were. So that was how Vogue came about. But I think one of the most interesting characters I met through my mother, who was a diplomat at the time, and of course, everybody she met was interesting, but Russian.
Taught
so
by Nabokov, I must add.
Yeah. My professor had been Vladimir Nabokov. And I loved languages, and I loved Russian. I did the sound of it and the literature. And there was Vyshinsky, and he was charmed that here's an Indian girl who speaks Russian. And so I said, I know a Russian song. And he said, which one? And of course, it was one of their national songs. Shiraka Strana Maya Radnaya, it began. My native land, etc. So he sang it with me. And we had a lovely time together. And long afterwards, somebody said to me, didn't you know that he was this ghastly, this horror? You know, he had presided over these terrible trials. And I said, well, I didn't know, you know. We just talked and got to know each other. And Soviet Union was a great supporter of Indian independence. So that was how that happened.
Growing up in the Nehru household as a child, because your father was in jail in and out most of the time before the independence time, he also passed away in the jail at the, so he did not get to see the independent India. So can you share some one of this intimate niece-uncle moment with Mr. Nehru?
Could you share an intimate moment with Mama? Not one, but many, I suppose.
Yeah, there's many,
Well,
I'm sure.
yeah, it would be hard to, because I looked upon Nehru as my third parent. He was as much responsible for my upbringing, my education, and my values as my own parents. So, I mean, we lived in the same house, and there were so many intimate moments, eating together. He pointed out to me books which he thought I should read. One of them was Don Quixote. And I can't remember offhand any other. But I remember as a very, very small child, I used to love wearing glass bangles, and I was wearing them, and I'd fallen down and cut my wrist, and it was bleeding, cut my hand. So I ran to him, And I said, look, you know, I've hurt myself. So he took me up to his bedroom, to his bathroom, and there were shelves there where he used to put lots of products which people used to send him. And there was a bottle there which said, pain-killing liniment. Every drop kills pain. So he took this and he washed my wound and spread this on it, and he said, there, it's going to be all right.
Can I just add
Sure.
one thing?
Sure.
Sorry. When she decided to get married, which was at the very, very young age of 20, of course, there was great consternation in the family. And so her mother and others, you know, were worried about why this very young woman wants to get married so early. And Nehru said to her, I'm not sure whether it was now directly or via your mother, but in any case said, look, there's so much to be done. Are you sure you want to be married by the age of 21? Of course, she didn't listen to him. She got married anyway.
I just wanted to ask you about your recollection of the day of independence, the day India became independent. Where were you on that day?
No, I was still in America at the time. I just finished college, but hadn't come home. So I was not in Delhi on that particular day.
So when you came back, what seemed different, other than the euphoria for coming to a country that was
It
free?
was a very traumatic, dreadful, and tragic time. Because when I came to Delhi, my uncle's home I came to because my father had died of his last imprisonment in 1944. My mother had been sent to the Soviet Union as our first ambassador to that country. So I came to live with my uncle in Delhi. His house, as the whole of Delhi, was filled with refugees. There were tents all over the garden. It was a grim, dark, drab, and tragic situation. There was also the feeling of elation that independence has come, but it was haunted by this other aspect of it, that India had been through partition. Millions of people were traveling both ways, from Pakistan to India and the other way. Millions of people were suffering in so many ways that, you could not just sit back and rejoice and say we've become free. It was a two-sided situation.
Speaking of partition, I'd like to come back to Ms. Menon, because you have written a lot of, you have done a lot of work on the partition stories from the feminist perspective. In the Indian subcontinent, partition is always looked from the Punjab point of view. The Bengal also went through a partition, and whatever turmoil we went through, it did not come to the forefront until about a couple of years ago. I would say in the last 4 or 5 years. Can you talk about your work, about what you've done about the partition stories and on your commentaries about it?
Again, as I say, feminists walk in where fools, angels fear to go. When Kamla, my colleague, and I started working on this, what we thought was that there has to be a way by which one transcends the nationalist narrative of partition. In India, of course, there's no dearth of partition writing. It's coming out of the woodwork. But it's all more or less within the nationalist frame. There isn't another point of view till very, very recently. So what could we add to it? I mean, what was I doing trying to work on partition as a literature person? I am not a historian. I'm not particularly interested in that grand narrative. I'm not interested in the transfer of power. So what am I going to do about it? I mean, what can one do? But as I said, we are feminists, so we look at things from a very different perspective. And one of the things that we decided we would do was to look at the event from a three-country perspective. It was actually supposed to be Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. And the very first time I came to Bangladesh, which was in 1987, it was actually to speak to someone who would work with us here, and that someone was Salma Sobhan, who's no longer alive, unfortunately, and very sadly. And in Pakistan, we had colleagues in Pakistan who were going to be doing the Pakistan side of the story, because of course in Pakistan it's not partition, it's creation of a homeland.
Yes.
And in Bangladesh, it was East Pakistan, nobody wanted to have anything to do with it. Because this is post-71.
Yes.
In 71, no one in Bangladesh wanted to talk about 1947 or 48. So that whole East Pakistan period was not on anybody's radar. And in fact, no one was willing to do it here. They are willing now, maybe, I don't know. And of course, in Indian Bengal, because it was not a violent event, it was not violent in the way Punjab was violent,
yes.
It had a very different sort of slow leak into people's consciousness. The refugees continued much, much later, till the mid-60s. Then in 71, another huge flood of refugees.
That triggers more in our psyche than the
Yes,
47 one.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
For you, the crucial date was 1971. For us, the crucial date was 1947, and when we started working in our Punjab, 1948 was immediately transposed with 1984. The siege on the Gurdwara and the massacre of the Sikhs. Mm-hmm. You see how things happen in the general consciousness.
Yes.
And in Pakistan, because that study also never got off the ground, although it progressed a little more, it was the time of the MQM, okay, and huge violence in Karachi. So for anybody to be, we were doing oral history, so we were talking to people. We were not doing the nationalist story. We were not looking at secondary sources. We were doing oral history. The Muhajirs were not willing to speak. The Sindhis were up in arms
against the MQM.
Against the MQM. Yeah. Partition was a dirty word, frankly. So on either side of Peninsular India, we weren't able to proceed because, as you see, even though we were determined to bypass the nationalist narrative, the nation kept intruding. The Indian nation, not so much, although 1984 was the sort of shadow. But Bangladesh, 1971 intervened, and in Pakistan, the whole of the 80s, the whole decade of the 80s, which was marked by MQM violence, simply didn't allow that part of the project to take off. So then we stayed with India.
Of course, in Bangladesh, we have, like my parents' generation, they ended up saluting three flags, the British Indian flag, the Pakistani flag, and the Bangladeshi flag. So for them, the Pakistani period was a blip kind of thing. They have the childhood, and they had the next 40 years of post-independence. So for them, even though my mother, for example, she was from Murshidabad, and when the partition happened, they initially thought that they didn't have to move. So they celebrated.
Like all our families.
Yes.
I'm from Lahore.
Exactly.
My grandmother walked out of the house and left the keys with a neighbor and said, I'll be back next week.
And 2 days later, they found that the border has been redrawn and it's a totally different country. So we have all these stories here that nobody has tapped into. And now that it's being tapped into, many of these people with the stories are fading away. So this is something we have to delve into very quickly. At the same time, can you also talk about your other work? I mean, you have done, by the way, she has also been given the 4th highest award, the Padma Bhushan. You have been, Padmasri, sorry, in 2011.
We won't talk about awards when they're all being returned.
So that actually sort of gives you an idea about the amount of respect she has garnered with her work, basically. That the award was a recognition of that.
Well, you know, I have to say that the women's movement has changed my life. So let's just say that anything that has come from that must go back into it in some way or the other. And of course, what's very nice about being at the margins, being on the margins, which is where feminism is and remains, I think, to this day, even more beleaguered than when we started out. Much easier to do what we did then than it is today, by the way. But the best thing about being on the margins is that you have very little to lose. It's when you're in the mainstream that you're worried about what you might lose. But if you're outside the mainstream and if you're on the margins, well, all you can do is to fall off. But there's not much more that you can do. But talking of margins, when we started publishing, all our friends in Urvashi and I, all our friends in publishing said, "Oh, rather you than us." And where will you find the material to publish? So we said, well, I don't know, it's half the human race, we'll find it somewhere. And I remember going to a very good friend who was then with Oxford University Press in Delhi. And he looked very skeptical and he said, you know, girls, he said to us, girls, we were in our mid-30s, I think you're taking a risk. Have you a business plan? We said, no, we don't have a business plan. We have a movement. He said, it's a big risk. We said, nothing ventured, nothing gained. We had only 1,000 rupees between us. We put that 1,000 rupees in and we started. About 5 years later or 6 years later, we met this gentleman again, and he was in the middle of publishing an anthology of feminist writing. So I said to him, but this is a losing proposition. Why are you doing it? He said, when Julia Kristeva moves from the footnote to the main text, we have to look up.
Before we open up the floor to questions, my last question would be first to you. What are you writing on right now? Are you working on a story or a novel?
Well, I've just brought out a collection of short stories.
It should be out here.
And that should be out here. And I hope to begin a novel. All my novels have been, well, infested, I should say, with the atmosphere of the time.
Well,
and that needs writing
unique,
about.
genre right away.
Yeah. But I haven't had time because of all this this business that has begun, that has led us to protest, which has led to a lot of traveling and other work and not left me much time to sort out my thoughts. But I do plan to do that.
We look forward to that. Thank you. And Ms. Menon, what are you working on right now?
Well, I'm working on a biography of a woman called Zora Sahgal, who's a very well-known actress and theater personality, and also very unusual for her time. Someone from a very aristocratic Muslim background who went into dance, which then was akin to a loose life. I mean, no one from a respectable family became a dancer. When in fact, Nayantara studied at the school at which Zora was teaching.
She lived to be 100.
She lived to be 102. And when she was, and she had a birthday party every year.
Yes.
To celebrate her birthdays. And you would arrive, I mean, she was always at home. You would arrive at her house at about 7, meaning it was early for Delhi, but you know, considering her age, you arrived at 7. And the minute 3 friends had gathered, she would call her daughter Kiran and say, Kiran, where's the wine? On her 100th birthday, which was celebrated with the publication of a book on her by her daughter, it was in a public space at an international center, and there were 100 roses, and there was a huge chocolate cake and everything. And while everyone was having the cake, she suddenly vanished. She disappeared. So I asked her daughter, I said, where's Zora Appa? And she said, I think she's gone to the room. So I thought, she's not well, you know, she's 100. I went up to the room, and she was tucked into bed And so I went and sat down next to her and I said, Zora Appa, can I get you a cup of tea or something? She said, what tea? Where's my whiskey?
Yeah, I was just watching her, one of her acting movies called Chinikam just a few days ago on TV, and she was as feisty as ever, as late as, even in her late years. Can I have the house lights on, please? We're going to open up the floor to questions.
My question is basically, why did it take India so long to wake up to the fact that the fact of the assault on the principles, the fundamental principles of India? Is it because of a sudden awareness of the sign of the times that things are going downhill, or is it because a sudden attack on one of your ilk, i.e. the writers? It's not as if you haven't had the assault before. India has, if you look at it in historical perspective, over the last 60 years, you have had occasional periods of communal troubles, serious ones. Why didn't the writers respond? Or why did anybody respond? I mean, there has been some response, of course, but not to the level that you currently see. Why did it take so long?
You want to take that?
I would have to disagree with you. I don't know where you are, but okay. The most serious things I should imagine myself, before that certainly there may have been communal riots and other things which should not have happened. But I think the three most serious things that have happened in which the Indian people did raise their voices, one was the emergency. Here was a situation where Nehru's daughter had made India into a dictatorship. And when she called an election, the Indian people justified Nehru's faith in them by voting her against her and bringing her government down in defeat. That was not a bunch of elite or intellectuals or a group of Indians. It was the people of India who had been given universal suffrage at independence, who performed this amazing feat so that not only did her party come down in a humiliating, crashing defeat, she herself lost her seat, which was quite incredible. Number one. Number two came the anti-Sikh riots. I myself was I was one of the founder members of the PUCL, the People's Union for Civil Liberties. And ours was the first organization, along with the People's Union for Democratic Rights, which immediately investigated this whole ghastly situation. We named names. We went into details about what had happened. It was a very thorough investigation, and it was published. So we did not keep quiet. Indians have not kept quiet at these, momentous occasions. The third situation is now. And this is much more serious even than the previous two. Because, as I say, all governments have sinned in any country, and certainly in India. And I am no apologist for any government of India or its sins. Where it was needed, I have always raised my voice. But there has never been an attack on India as fundamental as the Hindutva ideology, as it is called, is making today, where it is trying to turn India into a Hindu Rashtra, a Hindu nation, which means the destruction of the very meaning of India. And again, the people of India are speaking out, and this movement is growing. So I would not agree with you that nothing has been done. These things have been reacted to.
Can I just respond to that? I think to take a slightly retrospective view, it's actually, first of all, we have now not just a right-wing government, but we have the RSS, which is running the government. Which is the government. Okay. But I would say that the first stirrings of the disquiet or the extreme disturbance followed the demolition of the Babri Masjid. So that's from 1992.
No. The first one was the murder of Mahatma Gandhi.
Well, for
by
the
Nathuram
RSS.
Godse. Yeah.
For the RSS. Now, of course, they are venerating that murderer. But speaking of the general response to answer your question about why it took so long, well, it's actually been 22 years in the making, or 23 years, because there was a huge protest when the mosque was demolished. There was a huge outcry when the 2002 massacres took place in Gujarat. And of course, everyone was waking up even then. It's not that everyone was asleep. And even today, please remember, only 30% of Hindus voted for the BJP. It's a huge percentage, I'm not discounting it. But look what happened in Bihar. They have been thrashed as they should be, and they must remember that it is 80% of Hindus who thrash them, because the minorities in Bihar are quite small. So it's not as though minorities, so-called, have ganged up against the BJP.
But Ritu, that is the most remarkable thing about this uprising against Hindutva. It is being conducted by Hindus. It is the Hindus who are in the majority, and the majority of Hindus are opposed to Hindutva.
Another question?
Rather than a question, is it working?
It's on.
It's on? Okay. Nayantara, you were there right in the, I would call it the eye of the storm. I mean, politics and history together. And then you're also a novelist, and you say that this politics creeps on. Is it a conscious way you do it, or it just something, when you write a novel, a fiction, how do you sort of address, because I think you're the first person I'm seeing who was there when history was made. 47. I was just trying to imagine you growing up in a household where Nehru was there and other people were coming in talking about all this politics. There's politics and history simultaneously being created during that time. And now you're writing fiction. So I would like to hear more about your thoughts on it.
Well, you know, a writer does not choose her subject. The subject chooses you. And the material chooses you. Now, you write with whatever material you have. My material happened to be political, because everything that happened in the country affected our family domestically. There was not one single thing, whether it was the school we went to or anything else, that was not affected by the politics of the time. So that became my natural material when I began to write. But I have to say that I was writing, all of us who are politically inclined, we're not writing about politics. That would make a very boring book. What we're doing is writing out of a politically aware consciousness, which serves as the atmosphere, or maybe an event of the time. And it is how that situation, that atmosphere, affects people, men and women, how they respond to it. And that's how politics has worked in my fiction.
Swaroop Nehru, or Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, as people know her, was your mother. And as we know, we are all our mother's daughters. So we'd like to hear something from her public and her private persona that you might want to share with us. Thank you.
We are not all our mother's daughters. I am my father's daughter. Because I have been more influenced and affected by him as a personality than by my mother, though I loved my mother, but I was much closer to my father. And, you know, he was a greater influence in my life. Well, he was a remarkable person. He was a Maharashtrian. I am half Kashmiri and half Maharashtrian. And he gave up a flourishing law practice to join the national movement under Mahatma Gandhi. He called it the calamitous magic of Gandhi. He gave up his background, his home, even his language, because when he moved to the UP, which was one of the centers of the national movement, and my mother's family's home, he abandoned his own background, as it were. And he was, apart from being a professional success, he was a Sanskrit scholar who translated 3 Sanskrit classics into English. The Raj Tarangini, by the 12th century historian Kalan, then Mudra Rakshas, and Ritu Samhar. And, you know, that's the kind of life he would have led had he not joined the national movement. He was also a sportsman par excellence. He played cricket, tennis, he swam, he was a good horseback rider. He was a very remarkable human being. He was also a linguist. His mother tongue was Marathi. He was a Sanskrit scholar. He spoke Hindi, he spoke Gujarati, and a little Bengali, and French and German. I've heard people at various sessions talk about this language or that, and why can't it be either or? Why does it have to be this one and not that? And I always think, why either or? I mean, languages, the more you learn, the better. And certainly the world needs to, or school children need to have the opportunity to learn several languages, if that's possible. And he was a living example of all that. And to top it all, he had a beautiful singing voice. He loved to sing. The Nehrus had no ear for music, none. They could not even carry a tune. So when he came into the family, he was, you know, it was wonderful because everybody thought he was not only the most handsomest man they had ever seen, which he was, but also loved to sing, and both mostly Indian classical music, but also Western, because I remember that when he shaved, he sang an aria from Rigoletto. You know, I mean, his voice covered all kinds of music. That's the kind of man he was.
One last question. Yeah.
You have repeated statement twice, meaning of India. I would like to hear you speak on that.
That's
Meaning of India.
Idea or
Meaning,
Idea
the
or
meaning of India.
Yeah, yes, you said events happened, which is that
Yes,
the
well,
meaning of India.
you see, we are a huge country. We are a subcontinent. From north to south, from east to west, we speak different languages. We dress differently. We eat different food. Our customs are different. We practice different religions. How different can you get? You know? And this is the meaning of India. And this started, well, it's gone on for centuries through invasions as well as through trade contacts, through all kinds of ways. That is how India has become the kind of diverse civilization that it is today. So our diversity and our secularism was not a policy which was announced at independence. It's a fact of history. We only have to recognize that fact. And it cannot be put into the dustbin of history, as the present government is trying to do. You know, it would be like the Americans saying, we're going to put Abraham Lincoln in the dustbin, and our history is going to start with George Bush. You know, things don't happen like that.
We are running out of time, so thank you very much for coming. It was a wonderful session, and I do hope you enjoy a stay in Bangladesh and in Dhaka in particular. All the books that, the Out of the Line that was written by Ritu Menon, that's already available at the Bookworm. And so are all the other books of Ms. Sahgal is out there. Please come and check them out. Thank you very much.